the thing is, Emily, when you're going so fast and you're receiving all of these head nods, nods of approval on the outside, and you're so busy, you can ignore the internal signs for some time until you can't.
Hey friends, hope you're having a day that has some lovely moments attached to it. You are in for a treat. I know, every week you're in for a treat, but today I really just have to say Zack, our guest, is like an elixir, bringing the real experience of what it's like to make a big career jump. She is a former corporate litigator at one of the largest law firms in the world. And now she's a yoga and meditation teacher and wellness consultant. She has a host of programs, retreats, and offerings, but the one that I think is really compelling is mindful stress solutions for lawyers. So she'll talk a little bit about why that is a bold program offering, as well as more on her beautiful yoga and meditation studio that opened this year in upstate New York called Village Yoga. So we're going to talk about her radical career change and how to pay attention to the signs that a change is needed. We also talk about how decisions can be made independently. Of course, they affect everything, but cause and effect is something we need to be mindful of. And I mean, what is the first step to make that big jump? We just know we want to make it. And then what? So I think you're going to find this episode really useful if you are in a period of transition. And I know you're going to find Catherine's approach to her work and her life really inspirational. I'm Emily Drake, and this is Who's Missing. Let me just take you in for a second. This is a new background for me.
I know. I'm at the studio.
Yeah. What's going on at the studio today?
Well, first of all, it's like epically beautiful out. It's one of those October days, you know? It's like the sun is out, the air is crisp, the leaves are turning. It's like, it's right out of central casting today outside, and we've got these big windows, so I'm just looking at the leaves. Yeah. And I just taught a gentle yoga class to a bunch of lovely women, so it's a good morning here at the studio.
Yeah, that sounds like what I need this morning.
Me too.
Yeah, right. I know. It's great when what we teach is what we need. What are some of your, we're here to talk today about making a big change. What are some of your watch signs for a change being needed?
Yeah.
Because I'm reflecting on this myself this morning. Not that I don't know that there needs to be a change. I'll just disclose, like the change I think for me is internally. It's really this invitation of like, it's okay to show up with like not much available, Not for you in this moment necessarily, but just like, when life is really hard, dispensing of that grace internally is the change that I'm making. My watch signs are things like, it's sort of the hallmarks of depression. It's like, for me, irritability, feeling a little disoriented, like spinning. Yeah.
I think there's so many. I'm just thinking of the list.
Yeah.
And what I tell my people is I'm like filled with unsexy promises, I'm like, it's not like I figured this out. And I think for me, right? Yeah. I think for me, and I'm like, here's the good news, here's the bad news. I think my reference point for this is like, burnout, and I define that as like trying to give what I no longer have left to give. Like I'm being asked to give, I'm being asked to show up, I'm being asked to pour out, and I'm like, I have nothing left. And so the unsexy bad news is like, I don't think you can ever, I don't think you can take out that possibility completely, because we are living, breathing human beings in relationship with the energy we have to give and what we have to receive. And so it doesn't go away completely, but I think I've gotten better at noticing like when I'm edging closer to it, and have tools to like try to save myself before I go all the way there, or when I am there to give back. And so for me, it's like, I can't drop in. I can't be fully present. I'm kind of always in a state of what I call planic, which is like panicking and planning at the same time. And I'm moving really fast. Yeah. And I feel like there's not enough time, just not enough. Like I feel like I'm behind. Like those are the signs where I'm like, girl, we good. You know, like what has happened here?
You know, you have a lot to pull from. And I think the cool thing that I've observed in you is that you're willing to kind of have the way you've done things be interrupted and try something new. And that, I think, is a really uncomfortable place for a lot of people. So I'm wondering what your response is to that. And also, do you see that in your clients and the people you work with?
I think it's funny that you opened this up with like, you know, there's a variety of coping mechanisms. And when I work with folks, I'm like, let's lay them all out. And I do it in various ways. The way I work with people is really like assisted meditation and self-inquiry. And for me too, as a lawyer, like the Socratic method is kind of baked into how I approach things. So I'm always asking questions. And so I kind of ask varying questions to get to like, what's the list of your go-tos? And all of us have lists that are like some things we know are absolutely not going to get to the root cause of the dis-ease or, you know, dissonance.
Yeah.
And then there are some that are like research-backed, evidence-based physiological ways to reset your nervous system. And I think it's fine that we all have like options. So for me, like I love watching trash TV, and like but like I know when I get to the end of the day, I'm like, I am choosing to do this now. I am opting in to tuning out, and I'm so happy to be here. And I also know that like the thing that's going to help me reset for the next day is like connection, sleep, you know, like movement, breath, nature. So it's like you can have a lot of things that you reach for. Some will work, some will distract, some will make it worse. Like for me, I know like a coping mechanism is like I overwork. I'm always like, let me do one more thing. And I can tell when I get to that edgy place, it's like, that's just a distraction and like an ineffective coping mechanism that's actually making it worse. But it is like still a go-to. But for me, the things that I know work kind of are not that sexy again, and they stay the same. So I have these practices that I'm fairly committed to over the last several years that I do every day. And if I don't do them, it's like I know there's no chance I can get right with myself. Like, and these are just the daily bread and butter things that I need to like show up.
Well, you have to tell us. What are those things? Catherine, Zack?
I work with my people on this a lot, is to get, I call it a practice, a daily practice. A practice is not a perfect, it's a process, it's a reference point, it's something we come back to. It's a laboratory for our own kind of self-understanding. And for me, I've got a couple tools in my toolbox. A non-negotiable every day are my morning pages, which is like straight out of Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way. And I do 3 longhand pages every day. Do that as close to waking up as possible. So if I wake up before my kids, which is not usually happening, but it does sometimes, and it's the best. I can do this in the quiet, in the dark, and you know, it's so good with my coffee undisturbed. More often than not, it's after they leave the house for school and daycare. But I try to do it as close as I can before the outside world comes in. Seated silent meditation practice, I'm up to a couple times a week. Mindful movement / we'd call it like a yoga practice, I'm up to a couple times a week. Walking in nature a couple times a week. So those are like the rotations in and out. So
Yeah, if you're not already following Catherine on social, which you will be after this episode, your content is you. I mean, it is exactly what you just illuminated. This is like whenever you post something from your walks, it gives me such joy. You live in a beautiful place, but I also would say wherever you're walking, like that's a little bit of the task, right? Is like, what do you see?
Right.
How does it make you feel? I will also shout out Morning Pages, which you pushed me over the starting point so that I did them for a season of my life, and I'm getting back into them too. And say all of this to say, you know, it's like, 3 pages. How do you do it? I love to empty my mind. I think way too much. We talked about this, you know? So tell us about your relationship between your thinking self and your body self.
The thing about I love how you're like, you invited me towards Morning Pages. I did it for a season. Here's the thing is like, there's so many tools out there. And I think it can get confusing because people are like seeing all the options and like think they have to do them all, or it's an all or nothing thing, or that if that worked for that person, it's going to work for me. It's a very individualized process. And when you're choosing the things that are going to work for you, I always tell my people, like, keep in mind what you're naturally drawn to and enjoy, because if those are present, then there's a good chance you're going to be able to stay devoted. But also notice what pushes you and what makes you uncomfortable and what you're like, that's absolutely not for me, because there's information there for you too. Not in like an unsafe way that doesn't make me feel safe. I mean, like that makes me feel like, no, that's not for me, that's for someone else, you know, like listen there. And that's a bridge into like the relationship between my thinking mind and my body. For me, I could sit on the couch all day long with my books and my notebooks and I would never move. That is like a challenge for me, is getting myself to move every day, whether it's taking a walk or getting on my yoga mat, because that's the place that I have the resistance to, but it's also the best for me to be able to drop out of my mind, which is a busy place, and into the presence of my body.
We rewind to this place of being a corporate litigator in big law, which was a decade ago now. Why don't you describe to us the reality of your experience at that time in your life? Thread the needle to this mind-body connection that seems like it made it possible for you to make a big change.
It can be surprising for people at this point who meet me to learn that I used to be a corporate litigator. And I think the inverse is true too. Like when I was a corporate litigator, people would have never imagined this path that I'm on now for me. And it's funny because they're both very much a part of who I am. And they don't feel like they're dissonant to me, although they look that way from the outside, perhaps. It made sense that I became a corporate litigator. It made sense that I went right from, you know, my liberal arts education in undergrad into law school, right, straight through. And then from law school into big law. And it was like I was on this path of the next right thing, like, and really using the cues of the external world around me to make decisions, like praise and validation and good grades and like understanding head nods, like, oh, that's your plan, that makes sense. Like a life that on paper made sense. That was how I kind of ended up being a lawyer. There were definitely signs in my body and in my being that it wasn't the right fit for me. I got great grades, I got a great job, all these. So like on paper it's working, but inside I'm like kind of dying, like a little, and figuratively and literally. Like I think stress and anxiety were just racking my body, and my coping mechanisms looked like just not eating for most of law school. At one point I ended up at the university ER, and I think it was my third year. I was having what I now would say was probably a panic attack, but I was like, I'm dying. And I got there, and like the information I received back was not I got no diagnoses other than like, yes, Ivy League law school is really cutthroat and challenging. Like, get back out there, kid. But the thing is, Emily, when you're going so fast and you're receiving all of these head nods of approval on the outside, and you're so busy, you can ignore the internal signs for some time until you can't, you know, until you can't.
Okay, so you get this diagnosis, quote unquote, of like, welcome to law school.
Right. Welcome to hustle culture.
Welcome
Great.
to hustle culture. You know, you get a job even in an environment that I happen to have some familiarity with, but like that is a progression of that energy. Get us to a place where you're like, okay, you know, that's kind of like pre-contemplation before the change. What did that feel like and look like for you?
I practiced at my law firm for like almost 4 years. I was a summer associate there. I was very heads down and also just doing a good job, doing all the right things, like on the right cases, on the right committees, on the everything, like in the mix. It was, so again, on paper, like it's working. And that's a situation where you can really, overworking as coping mechanism is pretty validated and encouraged, and it's easy to just keep going and do more. And so, there were leaky moments. Like I realized I wasn't doing a great job of taking care of myself, even though at the same time, and this really picked up in law school, was very devoted to like a daily yoga and meditation practice, but it was like they were two very competitive forces in my life. And so I got to a point about 2.5 years in, almost 3 years in maybe, where I looked up. I had a bad breakup, I had a case that settled, and all of a sudden I could come up for air. And I realized I'd been so nose to the grindstone that for years that I didn't actually look up and around. And I did. And I was like, I don't think I want this. It's really annoying when you pause and listen, and the truth is so much different than the world you've crafted around you and all the decisions you made.
Heartbreaking.
And then you can't not know it. You can't unhear it. Then you'll do a thing until you don't. And that's the thing, is like sometimes we can carry around these truths with us for a long time before anything externally begins to shift.
Yeah.
But I think for me, that was pretty clear. I took in all the evidence. Again, it's very much to me, I'm the same person, just performing different roles. I looked at the evidence, I looked at the issues, I looked at the rules, I applied them, and I came to a conclusion that was, this is not for me. We often conflate two decisions into one. So there's like the decision to leave Big Law is one decision. And then there's the decision to what I'm doing next, and that's another decision. But because they get conflated so often, like I'm moving from Toronto because I'm leaving this job, and I'm moving to Houston for this job. Like those are actually different decisions, but they get conflated into one because it's a clean trade. So during the pandemic, in the few years before, we were still living in Washington, D.C. I had one kid at the time. I was married. I was teaching yoga and meditation and mindfulness-based stress reduction in DC, which is like, I always say, selling hot dogs at the baseball stadium, because it's like everyone is so stressed, all the while. My husband and I are like, one day we might leave the city. We'd love to leave the city and try someplace quieter. And so when the pandemic hit, we looked at each other and we're like, this has to be one day. Like, this is one day. If this isn't one day, I don't know what that is. Yeah. And so in that moment, we made the decision to sell our house in DC and leave DC, but we did not yet know where we would land, which was such a time of tumult and uncertainty. It felt easier to do something big like that in that moment, but that was really where it got clear to me, where I'm like, you can have the decision to leave, and then the decision to begin something else is a related but separate one,
Yeah. Giving each moment its reverence. And also, one of the things that an architect that I interviewed in season 1 still sticks with me is like, not be so precious about any one thing, And this is like, as I'm saying it, we talk about like, we teach the things we need to learn. That is so hard for me to do as someone who is like really wrapped up and engaged in meaning and juiciness, and to just sort of like cut bait and make a decision and like let it fall, let it be. You want to talk about like where I get uncomfortable? It's there, right? And what I'm hearing from you is like, yeah, these big changes happen, and like maybe eventually we have this narrative that we'll share. And I know that you're sort of thinking about output and writing and thinking and putting messages out right now. But in the moment, right, you're just deciding moment to moment. What is the thing? How did you communicate the decision you're going to leave your law firm? Was that a big day?
Yeah. From the time of realizing I didn't want to stay and I wanted to do something different to the time I left was about a year.
Yeah.
I can't not know that I don't want to be there. I'm like, I don't want to be here, right? But then there's all these logistical things that then you have to figure out. And so that took about a year. Like getting my finances in order, getting it was a lot about the money, honestly, because I knew I was leaping from this large salary and prestige, stumbling into entrepreneurial life, which I didn't actually realize. It took me about a year to kind of work out those details of like moving where I was living, like to a less expensive living arrangement, to, you know, like all of these things then took about a year. But I think often because we're so concerned, as we should be in moments with numbers and things on paper and spreadsheets, we often are just spending all of our time there. We're like, it's impossible. What will I do for health insurance? When it's like, those things are figure outable and you just kind of project manage and make a plan and deal with them. That like sometimes we spend so much time thinking that those are the only decisions that we then forget the like thing where you heard yourself say that you didn't want to stay in big law.
Yeah.
During that year, I started telling people, like my closest friends. It so happened I had like an audience of close friends who were also unhappy young litigation associates who were also kind of thinking already a couple years in, like, what else can I do? And so to say things out loud keeps me honest. It doesn't always work out. I can sometimes look kind of silly if I announce something and then it doesn't happen, but you know, I know it works for me in terms of motivation. And I said my last day would be February 14th, 2014, which was a Friday, and it was like Happy Valentine's Day to me. So I went home over the holidays at the end of 2013 and was like seeing my family and family friends, like telling them, and they're like, excuse me?
Yeah.
What? I'm sorry, what? You know, that will obviously test your resolution too, but it just made me realize like I had to understand that I was really serious about this, and it was good to have that like initial soft reaction. And then I actually decided that I would give my notice like the second week of January. So my last day ended up being January 31st, 2014. And so I had to give my notice and I had to figure out the people I needed to talk to. But yeah, like, I mean, I wrote a lot of notes down on paper, and then eventually I had to, and it was terrifying. I had to walk down the hallway to the managing partner's office and be like, thank you so much for all the opportunities and everything that you've invested in me. And I am leaving to go teach meditation and yoga. And I then had to have that conversation with all of the people that I needed to have that with at the firm. And the managing partner was like, that's really cool. Like, I think I got one of two reactions where like the one was like, that's really cool. And you could see people processing in their own head, like, what would they do if they leapt? You know, or like what? And then the other reaction that was really common was like, yeah, this place is really hard. Not everyone can hack it here. And I'm like, I don't think you're hearing me. I think you're really listening to what you're telling yourself right now about why it's good that you stay. And that was kind of it, you know, I could see that. I could see that those stories were not mine. I don't know how I had that kind of clarity and discernment. There's been plenty of times where I haven't been able to catch that and I've internalized other people's stories, but I was like, oh, that's you, that's not me, okay.
This week's spotlight is on Catherine's yoga and meditation studio in upstate New York, Village Yoga. Village Yoga serves the local community of Kinderhook, but also shares their offerings all over the world with their virtual membership option. Check them out at villageyoga.co. That's villageyoga.co. And now back to the show. You've got me thinking about like a quandary that I hear a lot with my clients is, I gotta go. This isn't for me. And part of what we do is pump the brakes a little bit on that because, of course, you know, the geographical cure or the ripcord, pull it, that fantasy, right? That you'll go somewhere else and it'll be great.
Yeah.
What I hear in you is the inside job of it all. You know, you looked up and you were like, okay, no. I mean, I'm climbing a ladder, but, and I say this a lot, it's on the wrong wall. And then there's this process of like, what I appreciate about you is like really knowing your own mind, right? And some of its limitations and some of its proclivities. So that when you go into a managing partner's office or you go to your mother, I don't know how she reacted, or your dad or your whoever, right? The people close to you, and they have this reaction, you can be like, I already kind of know the inner workings here. So this is what I've decided. And you can really see the other person as like, and you're having an experience, aren't you? You know?
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
But that takes time and a willingness, like you, I think, you know, we're sort of naturally cultivating to like pump the brakes a bit and just like slow it down so you could hear yourself, you know?
Yeah. I don't always do that. I sometimes
Sure.
leap fast.
Yeah.
But you know what? It's funny too, like what you're saying, we talked about this recently too, like the geographic cure. Like if I just move to Bali and then it'll be okay. And then it's like, well, actually, no, you're, you know, wherever you go, there you are, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And yet, there are environmental factors that do contribute to how we feel. So like for me, I stayed in DC for 6 more years after I left. The difference between being in an office with like freezing cold air conditioning with windows that didn't open and fluorescent lights and being in a space with like plants and fresh air and sunlight, like those were environmental factors that did contribute to the way that I felt in my day-to-day life. Being here in the Hudson Valley in upstate New York now, I'm like, I don't have traffic. I don't have to park. It doesn't take me an hour to get 3 miles. And that has, and I have so much nature and access to nature, that has also contributed to the way that it feels to be in my life.
Was there a part of you when you left that was like, maybe I need to, or just in part of your pre-contemplation, like go to another firm or be a lawyer somewhere else? You know, and how did it, because we're talking about like a big career change, right? How did you know it had to be something that didn't make sense to other people? You know?
Like the rational thing to do would have been to like get another lawyer job. Totally.
Yeah, sure.
And 100%.
Open your own shop, you know, whatever, right?
I do often meet people that I work with now as clients at like threshold moments. And I am never telling people to do what I did, right? It's just bananas. And I think I talked to a recruiter or two. I made a resume, which I still have hanging on my bulletin board. It's funny to look at it, you know, and it's like, I couldn't do it. Like, I think I knew that would have been, I don't know, it would have prolonged the inevitable. And I have a fairly high risk tolerance, I would say, for certain things that I know to be true. Like, I feel to, if I feel it to be true, I'm willing to take big risks. How deep is that truth for you? And the deeper it is and the louder it is inside of you, the more willing you are to take risky moves, at least to other people it would look risky.
Yeah. There's, as I've, you know, had the chance to get to know you over the past few years, I've watched, or at least observed and had an experience of you having made this decision. What I experienced, and let me know if this is, you made this big change, and since then, this is very reductive, I'm sure, you have been continuing to invest in this decision. And with a level of commitment that now has you, you know, with a key in your hand, like brick and mortar, creating literally a safe place for all of this to happen. So is that your experience of what you've done? How did you decide to open up something that has a door and windows and, you know, right, in this wildly virtual world? And floors and this very cool exposed brick. Yeah. I mean, truly, walk us through that.
You got it good. I am constantly iterating, and I was thinking about that this morning in the bathtub, which is where I do a lot of thinking. I feel like I was raised on a ladder and like a linear path that is straight and narrow. And some things are like that, but most organic matter, like living, breathing human beings and the natural world around us, actually don't do lines. They do circles and cycles and seasons. And when I realized, oh, that's why it doesn't feel good to like climb a ladder or reach a finish line, like on a straight and narrow course, like to allow myself to understand that like there will be seasons and cycles to things. I will do something and it will end. I will have an idea and I will create it. I will sustain that idea. It will finish. I will have, a kind of winter season where not much is happening. And when I allowed myself to like get more curious about that and attune my own rhythms to that, like it just makes sense to me. So the iterations are a part of that, and also just the place I am in my life of having young kids and needing to kind of start and stop there. And then the thing that happened to all of us in different ways, but happened, like this pandemic black void of years and time that started and stopped things. But for me, I was doing like 99% of my work in person before the pandemic. I had just launched my first virtual program, a meditation program called 40 Early Mornings in the end of 2019. But I went from like, being in a warm room with warm bodies to like the whole world is shut down. So I had to go online like all of us did in our own ways. And I couldn't find my virtual footing. I think it has to do with the fact that I am a person who spends a lot of time in their mind and ideas and the kind of air of it all, that I need grounding to thrive. And so for me, I was like, of course I want a brick and mortar space, a community space where people can come through the doors and feel the warmth of these walls and be together in person to do this kind of inner work in community, to sit together, to breathe together, to move together. And I always knew that I kind of needed that in order to thrive myself, and it was a part of what I came here to do. It feels like it's taken 10 years for it to happen in this way too. When you know it's not the right time, I've been thinking about alignment lately. Like this space, opening this Village Yoga studio here in our little tiny town in the Hudson Valley, was the right time, it was the right place, and it was the right version of me and my husband, who's my business partner on this too. Like it was right time, right place, right people. And there had been moments before where I wanted it so badly, and those things were not in alignment. And so as much as I tried to push it, it wasn't happening.
Yeah.
That is a clue to look for. It's like, are you pushing something and it's not taking off? Are you trying to push the river, or could you just stand in the river and let it like figure out the direction it's flowing? Trust me, I try to push the river all the time,
Yeah. I too am like, get me on the couch with my books and my papers and I'm good, I really love nesting. I love thinking. I love making connections. For me, the stretch is, truly to get out of my own head. That's the stretch. And that's what Who's Missing is all about. It's like not just who's missing, like whose voice, but also like what's missing. Like maybe, anything that sort of inspires, I think, those of us who might be slow to act, those of us who are acting quickly to sort of slow down, just like turn in the dials of your life, man. See what happens, what music you make. Is there anything that you want to ask people to do, or an action you're inspired by taking that you think could be helpful for others to take as they think about making a change?
The people that I tend to work with have a similar wavelength to me, which is like fast, furious. Let me do one more thing real quick. The answer is let me just do more. And the truth is, if you're like coming to a big decision point where you're trying to shift your external circumstances into internal alignment, like that you've actually got to create a lot of space for quiet and for doing nothing and for listening and for resting, especially if you're at this decision point and you're pretty burnt out. And that's what none of us want to hear, because we want to figure it out like yesterday. Like I always say this, I want it done yesterday. And it's like just remembering that things are going to unfold in a longer timeline than we want. And to get out of our own way, to create that space, like to create that margin, you know, that like that blank space on the paper, because otherwise it's just, you know, you think about the page of your favorite book, and without that blank space, you can't read the words, like, but we're just constantly like filling more, do, go, fast. And so, yeah, it's frustrating to hear like, this is going to take longer than you think. If you try to keep doing more fast, it's going to take even longer. So slow down, stop, build in pockets of pause so that you can do this listening work. And then you get your marching orders from somewhere that is not like probably the script for success that you were given as a kid. And then you have to do the external shifts to just bring that into being. And that's different work. You know, it's different work. But we're always like, we love to be taskmasters of our lives. And this is like, there are the tasks. You gotta kind of drop below it.
Yeah. And here's the invitation that I would have. If you're like, what in the actual, you know what? How do I, what? Like, and you're listening enough to be like, yes, you can ask for help with this stuff.
Yeah. You know, and it's like, right. To me, it's like, what's your container for change? It could be a book. It could be your own journal. It could be working with a coach or a facilitator. It could be, you know, listening to a series of podcasts, whatever it is. But to have that container for change and transformation is vital to, number one, know that you're not alone. You're not bananas, you know, and also to know where the walls are.
Yes. For sure. That part. Yes.
Yeah. And that's what we do, you know?
That's what we do.
That's what we do.
That's what we do, babe. For each other as well.
I was just
Thank
gonna
you.
say that. Yes, for each other. What a gift.
Oh my gosh. Thanks so much for being a part of Who's Missing.
Thank you. Thank you. That was fun.
Until next time, because you know there'll be a next time. There always is with us. Thank you
wait.
again.
So much more to come. Thank you.
Love you, babe. Mwah. To our lovely listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Go ahead and click on that subscribe button, that follow button, that forward button if you haven't already. And if you like this episode, share it. We'd love for you to share what you heard and how it resonated with you with someone else. You can also see more of us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. You got it at Who's Missing Podcast. Talk to you soon.